She said, "I called for a mechanic, not a tow truck hobbyist playing pretend." The crowd gathering on the shoulder laughed. He did not move. Behind her, the white Aventador sat smoking on the gravel, already written off as scrap by two mechanics who'd hung up on her call. She had no idea the man she'd just mocked had learned that engine before it ever wore a nameplate. What he did in the next 20 minutes, she would spend years trying to explain. The porch light was still on when Daniel Reyes came downstairs, though the sun had already cleared the tree line behind the house. 7 pairs of shoes sat on the top step in a row. Sneakers, rain boots, the scuffed pink flats Maya wore to school on picture day, arranged smallest to largest, toes pointed the same direction, like a small congregation waiting for something to begin. She did this every night before bed. She had never explained why, and he had never asked her to. "Bolt doesn't have shoes," she said, from the kitchen table, not looking up from her cereal. The stuffed elephant sat propped against the sugar bowl, one ear worn thin from years of being carried by its edge instead of its middle. "So he has to guard the ones that do." "Good system," Daniel said. "Do you think he minds, guarding stuff instead of wearing it?" He set her lunch bag by the door before he answered, because he never answered her fast questions with fast answers. "I think some things are built to guard. Some things are built to wear. Nobody minds being what they're built for." She considered this with the seriousness of a 7-year-old deciding whether an adult had just said something true or was simply tired. Then she went back to her cereal, satisfied enough, and he let it go the way he let most of her questions go, not because they didn't matter, but because they mattered too much to answer in a kitchen, with the clock running toward the bus. The garage sat a quarter-mile down the frontage road, a single bay with a hand-lettered sign, and a lift that groaned on its second cycle every morning, like it was clearing its throat. Daniel had built the workbench himself, and he kept it the way no roadside mechanic in 3 counties kept a workbench, sockets racked by micrometer size, not just by set, torque specs written in grease pencil on index cards, laminated, filed by manufacturer, a habit of resetting every tool to its exact position before touching the next one, even mid-repair, even when no one was watching. Men who fixed trucks and pickups and the occasional minivan for a living did not usually work this way. It was a discipline that belonged somewhere else, and every so often, a customer would catch him doing it and ask, half joking, where he'd trained. He always gave the same answer: around. The truth lived in a drawer under the register, beneath a stack of unpaid invoices he kept meaning to file. A laminated badge, factory issued, the photo on it younger than he looked now by a decade. D. Reyes, Sviluppo Propulsori, Sant'Agata Bolognese. He had spent 3 years on the Aventador development line there, in the building where prototypes were driven to failure on purpose, so customers never would, learning the exact sound an engine made in the half-second before something went wrong. He had been good at it, the kind of good that gets a young engineer's name quietly attached to a fix that outlives him. Then Elena had gotten sick, and he had flown home, and 8 months later he had buried her 3 miles from the house he grew up in, and Maya had been 11 months old, and there had been no version of that grief that fit inside a job requiring him to be an ocean away. He had not gone back. Some men would have called that a waste of a gift. Daniel called it a trade, made once, not reconsidered. Behind the badge, tucked so it faced the wood of the drawer and not the light, was a photo of Elena laughing at something off camera, her hand blurred mid-gesture. He did not take it out often. He knew exactly where it was, which was enough. 90 miles south, in a glass office on the 14th floor of a building bearing her own name in brushed steel letters. Vivian Cross was already 40 minutes into a call she had no patience for. She ran Cross Capital Partners the way she ran everything, on certainty, on schedules that did not bend, on the assumption that any problem, correctly funded, resolved itself. Her desk held nothing that wasn't working for her. Her assistant stood by the door with a tablet and a look that had learned, over 4 years, exactly how long to wait before interrupting. In an hour, she was due at a summit 200 miles north, where she would deliver a keynote on decisive leadership to a room of people who had paid $4,000 a seat to hear her say it. The white Aventador, idling in the garage below, a gift to herself after her fund's 4th consecutive record quarter, was, to her, simply the fastest way to get there on time. She had never once, in 15 years of building the firm, needed to trust a stranger to fix something she couldn't fix herself. It had never come up. She saw no reason today would be different. By the time the state trooper's lights came into view in his rearview mirror, Vivian Cross had already been failed by 4 people who were supposed to know better. The exotic concierge line she paid $19,000 a year to keep on retainer had put her on hold for 6 minutes before informing her that the nearest authorized Lamborghini technician was 2 hours out and didn't do roadside calls. The dealership's regional service manager, reached after that, had listened to her describe the smoke and the dead dash lights and told her, not unkindly, that it sounded like a total electrical failure, the kind that required a diagnostic bay, not a wrench, and a minimum of 3 days once the car was flatbedded in. A local tow company had sent a man who took one look at the Aventador's low, wide belly and said his truck wasn't rated for it. A second one had simply said no and hung up. By the time the trooper radioed dispatch for anyone closer, 40 minutes had burned off the clock. Her keynote was 90 miles away, and 11 cars had slowed to look at the white Lamborghini, smoking gently on the shoulder of the interstate, like something dying in public. Daniel had been 3 exits south when the call came through his shop line, forwarded from the county's approved vendor list, a list he was on mostly because nobody else wanted the 2 a.m. jump starts. Maya was in the truck beside him, home for a teacher workday, bolt buckled into the middle seat, with more care than the actual seatbelt required. She didn't ask questions when he took work calls. She'd learned, the way kids of single fathers learn early, which silences were hers to fill, and which ones weren't. He pulled the truck onto the shoulder behind the trooper's cruiser, gravel popping under the tires, and killed the engine. A small crowd had gathered the way crowds gather at accidents, people who had already stopped for gas, people who'd slowed down and then couldn't make themselves speed back up, all of them now standing at a respectful distance with their phones half raised, waiting to see what happened to a $200,000 car and the woman who'd been driving it too fast to notice it dying underneath her. Vivian turned when she heard his door shut. She took him in the way she took in everything. Fast, complete, already priced. Grease under 2 fingernails he hadn't scrubbed out that morning. A canvas jacket gone soft and gray at the elbows. A truck with a magnetic sign on the door that read, Reyes Roadside, in letters that had started to peel at the corners. She did the math the way she did math on every deal that crossed her desk, and the math told her this was not a man who could help her. Finally, she said, not quite to him. Then, to the trooper, "Is this it? This is who you sent?" The trooper started to answer. She didn't wait for it. "I called for a mechanic." Her voice carried, pitched for the crowd, without her quite meaning it to, the way command voices do after enough years of rooms built to listen. Not a tow truck hobbyist playing pretend. Somewhere behind her, a man holding his phone sideways for video let out a short laugh, more surprise than cruelty, and it was enough to loosen something in the crowd, a ripple of the kind of laughter that isn't really about the joke, just about being given permission. Someone repeated hobbyist under their breath, like it was a good line worth keeping. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't straighten his jacket, or look down at his hands, or do any of the small things a man does when a stranger has just told a highway full of witnesses exactly what he's worth. His face didn't move at all. It was the stillness of a man who had heard worse things, said quieter, in rooms that mattered more, and had learned there was no version of defending himself that improved the outcome. In the truck, Maya had rolled her window down 2 inches, the way she always did when she wanted to hear, without being seen hearing. She watched her father's face the way she watched it every night when he came home late, and she asked how his day was, not for the answer he gave, but for the one underneath it. His face told her nothing was wrong, so for her, nothing was. Vivian's assistant, a young man named Foster who had clearly not slept well in several days, opened his mouth as if to add something, then closed it again, recalibrating in real time whether backing up his boss was worth the exposure. Daniel walked past all of them to the car. He didn't ask permission. He crouched at the rear quarter panel, near the engine bay vents, and went still in a way that had nothing to do with the crowd or the woman still talking behind him about schedules and liability and whether this stretch of road even had a real garage nearby. He was listening. Not to her, to the car, to a faint, irregular click coming from somewhere under the bodywork, a sound most people would have mistaken for nothing at all, the electrical equivalent of a held breath. "Sir," the trooper, gently, aware the temperature on the shoulder had climbed past what was comfortable. "You able to help or not?" Daniel straightened, wiped his palm once against his jeans, and looked at the car instead of at Vivian Cross. "Give me 20 minutes, he said. His voice was quiet enough that half the crowd had to lean in to catch it, and level enough that none of them heard anything in it worth laughing at a second time. "Don't touch anything until then." Then he went back to work, and the space where an argument should have been simply stayed empty. He started at the rear diffuser panel, working the quarter-turn fasteners loose, with a driver he pulled from a roll in his back pocket instead of the toolbox. The roll he kept for anything that had to move fast, without stripping a head that cost $11 to replace and 40 minutes to source on a highway shoulder. The panel came away clean in both hands. He set it in the grass, bodywork side up, the way a man sets down something that isn't his and intends to give back exactly as he found it. Behind the panel, the wiring harness ran in 3 braided channels toward the rear electronics bay, and Daniel didn't reach for any of them yet. He listened first. The clicking was still there, faint, arrhythmic, coming from somewhere near the fuel system relay cluster, and he tilted his head a few degrees, the way a man tunes an instrument he already knows the pitch of. 3 seconds on, a half-second gap, 2 seconds on. That gap was the whole story, if you'd spent 3 years learning to hear it. "It's not the ECU," he said, mostly to himself, though Foster had drifted close enough to hear it, and repeat it into his phone, like it meant something to him, which it didn't yet. Daniel traced 2 fingers along the harness until he found the connector block feeding the inertia switch, the fuel cutoff sensor built to kill the pump instantly in a collision, wired in a spot that, on this generation of Aventador, sat close enough to the rear wheel well to catch road spray in weather nobody at the factory had tested for. He worked the connector free with a small flathead, careful, unhurried, and turned it toward the light. The pins inside had gone green-white with corrosion, a fine bloom of it creeping across 3 of the 8 contacts, not enough to short anything outright, but enough to make the sensor's signal stutter, and a stuttering inertia cutoff signal reads to the car's computer exactly like a crash. The whole system had done precisely what it was built to do: assume the worst, shut the fuel pump down, protect a driver who was never in danger. 2 dealership technicians and a factory hotline had all diagnosed catastrophic failure over the phone. None of them had ever crouched here, in the rain, with their hands on the actual part. "That's it," Daniel said, quiet, certain. Not for the crowd. He pulled a can of contact cleaner and a fiberglass pick from his kit, tools that belonged more to a watchmaker's bench than a roadside toolbox, and went to work on the pins one at a time, blowing each dry before moving to the next, checking his progress against the light every 30 seconds, like a man polishing something he intended to keep. The crowd had gone quiet without deciding to. The trooper had stopped talking into his shoulder radio. A woman near the front lowered her phone an inch, no longer filming the spectacle of a stranded supercar, and started, without quite noticing the shift, filming a man work. Foster, still holding his tablet, had typed Reyes roadside into a search bar, out of pure nervous habit, mostly to have something to do with his hands. What came back stopped him. Not the towing company's thin, 3-review listing, a name buried in the second page of results, a technical service bulletin from 11 years earlier, a PDF hosted on an obscure automotive forum, authored by a D. Reyes, Sviluppo Propulsori, addressing an intermittent fault in the Aventador's rear sensor harness under wet weather conditions. Miss Cross. Foster's voice had lost its polish. He held the tablet out without fully understanding what he was holding. I think he used to work for the factory. I think he wrote the bulletin about this exact problem. Vivian took the tablet. She read it twice, the way she read term sheets when a number looked wrong. Not because she doubted the math, but because some part of her needed the second read to catch up to the first. Her posture didn't collapse. It recalibrated, the way a market recalibrates after news it should have priced in already. A stillness, a small intake of breath, held a half-second too long, her eyes moving from the screen to the man crouched at her rear bumper and back again, doing the same math she'd done 40 minutes earlier, and getting, this time, an entirely different answer. She didn't say anything yet. That would come later, and it would cost her more than an apology usually costs a woman who has never had to give one on a public shoulder of highway. Daniel reseated the connector, clicked it home, and stood. He walked to the driver's door, reached in without ceremony, and turned the key he'd left untouched until now. The Aventador's 12 cylinders caught on the first crank, a low, even growl, nothing like the ragged death rattle it had been making 40 minutes earlier, and settled into an idle so smooth that a man 3 cars back let out a low whistle he hadn't planned on. Maya, still watching from the truck's cracked window, turned to look at her father's face the way she always did. He wasn't smiling. He never smiled at moments like this. It wasn't his habit, and she'd stopped expecting it. But something in his shoulders had loosened, the particular ease of a man setting down a weight he'd carried so long, he'd forgotten it had a name. "Dad fixes things nobody else can," she said, to no one in particular, to Bolt, to the dashboard, in the plain, unbothered voice of a kid stating something she'd simply always known and never thought to mention out loud. "That's just what he does." She said it without weight, without pride even, the way you'd say a fact about the weather. It was the truest sentence anyone had spoken on that shoulder of highway in 45 minutes, and nobody but her heard it. She found him 3 days later, at close of business, when the last customer's truck had pulled out of the lot and the light through the bay door had gone the color of weak tea. Vivian Cross arrived alone, no assistant, no driver idling at the curb, the Aventador nowhere in sight, replaced for the occasion by a rental sedan so unremarkable it took Daniel a moment to place who was getting out of it. She had changed clothes for this, not into anything humbler, she didn't own humbler, but into something that read as an apologies costume anyway, muted, unbranded, a version of herself, with the volume turned down. She stopped a few feet inside the bay door. On the painted line he kept customers behind for insurance reasons, and looked at the shop the way she'd once looked at him, cataloging, pricing, except this time she seemed uncertain of the number she was arriving at. "I looked into who you are," she said, no preamble. It wasn't in her to manage one. "Sant'Agata, 11 years. The bulletin has your name on it." Daniel wiped his hands on a shop rag, unhurried, and set it down folded, the way he set everything down. "It does. You could have said something. On the highway. You could have told me exactly who I was talking to. Wouldn't have changed how fast the car got fixed." She absorbed that the way she absorbed things that didn't flatter her, briefly, and then passed it, because there was a transaction still to complete, and Vivian Cross did not leave transactions unfinished. She opened the leather folio she'd been holding against her side and set it on his workbench, angled toward him. A cashier's check. $50,000. Her firm's name embossed at the top. The amount typed in a font that made the number look smaller than it was. For the repair, and for what I said. She didn't soften it into an offer. She stated it like a correction to a filing error, the kind of number that made problems disappear in every other part of her life. I'd like to make this right. Daniel looked at the check for exactly as long as it took to read it, and no longer. No charge, he said. That's not. She stopped, recalibrated, tried again, quieter. That's not how I do business. It's how I do this. Just then, the office door swung open, and Maya came through it at a run, still in her school shoes, bolt tucked under one arm, mid-sentence about a spelling test, before she registered the stranger standing on the painted line, and pulled up short, suddenly shy in the way of kids who understand a room has changed temperature, without knowing why. Vivian's eyes went to her, not unkindly, just a beat too long, an executive's habit of noting every variable in a room, cataloging the daughter the way she'd cataloged the badge, the bulletin, the shop. It didn't need to mean anything. Daniel didn't wait to find out. He stepped, without hurry, without a word that could be repeated back as confrontation, half a pace to his left, putting his own shoulder between his daughter and the stranger's folio full of money, a movement so unhurried it looked almost incidental. "Hey, bug, give me 2 minutes. Go grab your homework off the truck seat." Maya went, unbothered, already forgetting the stranger existed. The bay was quiet again. Vivian closed the folio without being asked to. "I don't understand you," she said, and it wasn't an accusation this time. It was closer to the truth than anything she'd said on the highway. "You don't have to." Daniel picked the rag back up, turned toward the lift where a Silverado waited on jacks, a job that had nothing to do with her. "Drive safe getting home." She stood a moment longer on the painted line, the check still in her hand, the shop's single fluorescent tube humming overhead, and then she left the way she'd arrived, alone, in the rental car nobody would recognize, with nothing to show for the trip but a number in a folio that a stranger hadn't wanted. Daniel went back to the Silverado. He didn't watch her taillights pull out. By the time Maya came back in with her spelling list, he was already elbow-deep in someone else's engine, exactly where he'd been an hour before any of it happened. The footage had traveled the way footage does now, a bystander's 40-second clip, shaky, thumbed with a caption about a rude CEO and a quiet mechanic, picked up by an account with 2 million followers, then a second one, then a regional news affiliate that ran it under the header, "Who is this man?" By the time Lamborghini's North American office called the number on the Reyes roadside sign, they already had the bulletin pulled up on a second monitor. His name matched against 11-year-old engineering records nobody had thought to archive with any urgency until 3 days ago. The event they organized was small by their standards and enormous by his. A regional showroom 2 counties over, glass walls scrubbed to the point of invisibility, a single white Aventador turned on a low platform under lighting so exact it made the paint look wet, folding chairs in careful rows, a local news crew, and 2 automotive journalists who'd driven 4 hours for it. A podium with a company crest that Daniel hadn't seen in person since the day he'd cleaned out his desk in Sant'Agata. He wore the same canvas jacket. He'd thought about not wearing it, and then hadn't changed. Maya sat in the front row in her good shoes, Bolt on her lap, swinging her feet, because the chair was built for someone taller. She didn't understand most of what the regional director said into the microphone, words like torque specification and field bulletin reissue, but she understood her father's hands, folded in front of him, still in the particular way they only went still when something mattered. The director held up a laminated sheet, blown up to poster size on an easel beside her. 11 years ago, a young engineer on our development team identified and documented a fault most manufacturers never catch until it's cost someone a car, or worse. His name was removed from our internal archive in an administrative error we only just corrected. She paused, Let the room feel the size of that word, error, sitting where a much smaller word used to be. As of this morning, Technical Service Bulletin 4471 carries the name it always should have, Daniel Reyes. The applause came slow, and then all at once, the kind that surprises the person it's for. She wasn't finished. In recognition of that work, and of what 3 witnesses on an interstate shoulder watched him do, with nothing but a flashlight and 20 minutes, the Cross Foundation, in partnership with Automobili Lamborghini North America, is funding a full expansion of Reyes Roadside. She let the number sit before she said it, the way a good number is supposed to be said. $500,000, a second bay, factory-certified equipment, and a paid apprenticeship, renewed every year, for one student who might otherwise never get a foot in a shop like this one. Daniel didn't move for a second. Then he nodded once. The smallest motion the moment could still register as acknowledgement, and looked for Maya's face before anyone else's. She wasn't looking at the easel or the check-sized number floating above it. She was looking at him, the way she always did, reading the one instrument she actually trusted. Vivian Cross had come without Foster, without a driver, in a plain gray coat that didn't match anything she'd worn on the highway. She waited until the applause thinned and the journalists had turned their attention to the car on the platform before she crossed the room to him, alone, the way she'd come to the garage 3 days earlier. No entourage between her and whatever she owed him. She didn't give a speech. She'd had one ready, he could tell, and she left it wherever speeches like that go to die. "I was wrong about you on that highway," she said. 6 words less than the ones she'd rehearsed. "I'm not going to pretend the check fixes that. I just wanted you to know I know it." Daniel extended his hand. She took it. Neither of them said anything else. It was enough, and both of them seemed to understand, in the same instant, that anything more would have made it smaller. He got home early that evening, early enough that the porch step still had daylight on it, early enough that the shoes weren't lined up yet, because Maya hadn't gotten around to it. She'd gone straight from the truck to the kitchen table, still in her good shoes, peeling the wrapper off a granola bar, while Daniel started dinner without turning on the overhead light, just the one over the stove, the kitchen gone soft and gold, the way it did at that hour in early fall. He made grilled cheese, the same way he always did, cutting hers into triangles and his own into rectangles, a distinction she'd never asked for and he'd never explained. She sat with Bolt in her lap and her homework folder open and unattended beside her plate, more interested in the day than the spelling list. "Dad," she said it around a bite, not looking up. "Why didn't you want her money?" He set the spatula down, the way he set down everything, deliberately, before answering a question that mattered. "Because I wasn't out there fixing her car for money. I was out there because it needed fixing. Those aren't the same reason, and I didn't want to pretend they were." She thought about that with the same seriousness she gave every answer he gave, slowly, chewing, turning it over. Then she looked toward the window, where the porch step sat bare in the last of the light, and something simpler seemed to land in her. "Dad, do you think she knows how lucky she was?" she asked. "That it was you, and not somebody else out there?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at her, not the practiced stillness he'd worn on the highway, something looser than that, something with nowhere left to hide it. And then, later, after the dishes, after her bath, after she'd gone out to the porch in her socks to set her shoes in their row, smallest to largest, so they don't get lonely, he stood in the doorway of his room and opened the drawer under his sock drawer that he opened maybe twice a year. The badge lay where it always lay, face down. He turned it over. His own face, younger, looked back at him next to a title he hadn't used in 8 years. Behind it, Elena, laughing at something off camera, her hand blurred mid-gesture, exactly as he'd left her. He didn't take either one out of the drawer. He never did. Knowing where they were had always been enough. He looked in on Maya once more before bed, Bolt already tucked under her arm, her shoes already in their line outside the door, where she could check on them if she woke. Then he turned off the hallway light. Some men spend their whole lives being measured in dollars. The rare ones are measured, instead, in what they were offered, and quietly, without a word for anyone to repeat, refused.